Well, a war of claims is also breaking out, viewers, even as we speak. Now, Russia claims a key victory in war for Kiev, says that it is in control of Hostomel airfield. Now, Hostomel is situated just outside Kiev. There's a big battle for it over the last 24 hours. It went from Russian control back into Ukrainian control, and now the Russians say they've got hold of it. Heavy transport planes can land at Hostomel if the Russian claim is true, which would facilitate in the Russians bringing in more troops and be able to put more boots on the ground, which would, of course, complicate issues for the Ukrainians. I want to go straight across to Volodymyr Solohab, who had to leave, in fact, Kiev yesterday. Fighting was happening in an area where he was staying. In fact, the gym that he used in that particular locality, fighting had broken out. I'm also joined by Jonathan Gilbert, who's reporting for Times Now, and he is just across the border in Romania, if I'm not mistaken, on his way to Odessa. I want to go straight across to you first, Volodymyr Solohab. Whereabouts are you now, and what is the security situation there?
Well, yesterday night, I decided to leave to Lviv, which is in the western Ukraine. It's very close to the Polish border, some 80 kilometers away. And Lviv has always been considered a safe haven, even though there were reports of the sirens here. But there has been still no reporting or of shelling or bombardment of the city. So basically, and yesterday when we were still in Kyiv, we saw lots of people trying to flee. They are all fleeing here to the west, most of them here to Lviv, I'm sorry. So now that I'm on the streets here, it's eerily quiet. There are very few people here. There's definitely very few cars. And when I was going in an Uber from the train station to my hotel, my driver said, listen, this is Friday afternoon and there is no traffic. I've never seen like this before. So it is peaceful, it is quiet, but maybe too quiet, I would say.
Eerily silent. Okay, well, Volodymyr, where is the Russian deployment, if at all, close to you? Is it close to you? Has Lviv been struck? We believe that there were some strikes, I'm not sure, but what's the situation there security-wise?
Well, in terms of the cities, unlike in the Kyiv, the city itself is pretty much quiet. The city is safe, and there has been no reports of any groups coming into the city or any fightings or any shellings. There has been some reports of fighting and shelling on the outskirts, but nothing in on the scale that we're seeing in Kyiv these days. Because in Kyiv, as we discussed earlier today, the Russians dressed in Ukrainian uniforms are coming into the city. They are engaging in fights with civilians, and that is very scary.
That is indeed very scary. Have you heard from some of your own friends? We believe that a large number of Kyivians are already in bomb shelters because there is an air raid siren being sounded almost every 5 minutes.
That's absolutely correct. Almost all of the friends I'm talking to, I'm chatting with, they all said that at some point during the night, one or even several times, they had to go to the bunkers, they had to go to the underground shelters because there were sirens and because there were threats of aerial bombardments. And more of my friends that stayed in Kyiv, they are trying to leave to the west.
Well, Volodymyr Solohab, thank you very much for tuning in with us and giving us the latest from Lviv, which is further west from Kiev. Let me go across to Jonathan Gilbert. Jonathan, you're trying to make your way, of course, through another route into Ukraine. But as you go along, you're going to see, of course, a large number of Indians and Ukrainians exiting from their country, hoping to find sanctuary where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. As you heard from our correspondent just a few moments ago, the number of refugees fleeing the fighting now must number in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. We've seen extraordinary footage of car traffic jams stretching back to the horizon. I was hearing only just a few minutes ago about someone, an Englishman as it happens, who fled to Poland, who went west across the Polish border, and it took him something like 48 hours solid driving just to make that journey. So yes, I'm heading to where Romania meets the extreme southwestern border of Ukraine, close to the large city of Odessa. We saw that footage just here on Times Now of tanks cruising the streets of Odessa. So I'm fairly confident we're going to be seeing some substantial refugee arrivals there as well.
And of course, the devastation. Now, it's a soft underbelly, so to speak, of Ukraine, Odessa, given the fact that it's also a vital port and connects it to the rest of Europe and, of course, supplies. So it's an important place for the Russians to camp, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, vastly important from a strategic perspective, just for reasons you've just described. Of course, Kiev is significant for different reasons, Lviv for different reasons again. But Odessa, I mean, you've heard it in the history books, you know, it has a strategic naval significance stretching back centuries. So yes, absolutely, that would have been one of the key targets indeed for Putin's forces.
Jonathan Gilbert, thank you very much. And let's hope that you can get to Odessa as soon as possible to bring us live footage really of the action there. Thank you very much for tuning in. I want to now explain to our viewers, how is it that Russians have blitzed the Ukrainians? That's because they've deployed a formidable arsenal of deadly weapons that are perhaps the most advanced in the world. Russia is no pushover. It's the second most powerful, or perhaps even the third most powerful military power in the world. Watch this.
Despite appeals and warnings from the world, Russian forces launched strike on Kyiv. Dramatic video shows what appears to be a cruise missile slamming into Ivano-Frankivsk airport inside Ukraine. While the conflict has clearly gone out of hand, here's a look at the weapons that the Russian forces may use as far as land combat is concerned. The most potent Russian weapon, the Iskander surface-to-surface missile. The Iskander warheads can be anything from standard high explosive to cluster to bunker busting. Also, the speed at which Iskander operates would make it difficult for Ukrainian air defense systems. The shock and awe artillery attack would see Russian forces depending on their T-90 battle tanks. Some visuals released by the Ukrainian government indicates that they are already in action. The Russians also have a new lethal self-propelled tracked howitzer called Koalitsia SV. Then there is Uragan 1M, a truck-mounted multiple-launch rocket system that could cause much damage to Ukrainian troops if deployed. As the conflict escalates, the world is praying for peace. Bureau Report, Times Now.
Viewers, the West, led by the United States, that has lost the fight, now wants India to save its face. Later tonight, the UNSC is going to be sitting. And they're hoping that India takes a very, very strident position against Russia. The France, US and other Western democracies want India to drop its neutral posture, as they say, and condemn Russia out of hand. But viewers, many believe that this is not practical. The cost of dumping Russia could far outweigh the benefits of holding up the West's sagging tent. More than this, here are some hard facts, viewers, that may also explain why India is reluctant to back Kiev. After all, Ukraine hasn't been a very loyal supporter of India either. In 1998, Ukraine condemned India's nuclear tests, didn't stand with us, voted against India at the UNSC after Pokhran, when we were sanctioned by the international community, sold Pakistan T-80 tanks worth 650 million, and these are advanced tanks, voted yes for UN interference in Kashmir. How that has come back now to hurt Ukraine. Well, There are no free lunches in diplomacy, viewers, and I want to open this up, and I want to bring in Major General Bakshi, as well as Andrew Wood, ex-British ambassador to Russia, Tatiana Kukareva, Russian journalist, Maruf Raza. None of these individuals require any introductions. Let me begin first with you, General Bakshi. There is a lot of pressure. All eyes will be on India. We've already been told to take a position anti-Russia. Give me two reasons, sir, why we shouldn't.
Look, as Brahmachalani said very rightly, did the Americans take a position on our latest conflagration with China? 250,000 Chinese troops deployed against us. Did somebody take a stand on our side? It was a very neutral, very nuanced stand that came from Washington and from the West. So, I mean, I don't understand the basis on which we are being asked to turn away from a nuanced stand.
Right.
Every country looks after its own national interests, right? And you've just listed what Ukraine has been doing. Selling T-80 tanks. We were forced to buy the T-72s and T-90s. I was in the military operations directorate only because Ukraine had sold Pakistan these tanks to give them the edge. So now that you are in trouble, you remember that India must take a principled stand. This is not Nehruvian India, which was morally preachy, which was more interested in values. We find that values don't hold democracies together. Every time, we have been finding Western countries siding with Pakistan. So,
Nehruvian India might have been...
when it came to supporting Pol Pot.
Yes, well, General Saab, Nehruvian India might have been morally preachy, but it was also conveniently selective. And Brahma Chileni, who's India's leading strategic affairs expert, is here with us. Mr. Chileni, some reasons why India should be neutral and not push the envelope against Russia.
Well, let's begin by asking ourselves, what will India achieve by condemning Russian aggression? First, India has already issued a statement. The statement was about Prime Minister Modi's talk with President Putin.
Yes.
And the statement very clearly identifies the conflict as a Russia-NATO issue. That's the right frame to describe this conflict. In the West, it's portrayed as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Of course, it's Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the invasion happened because of NATO. So it's a Russia-NATO issue, and the Prime Minister of India has urged that NATO and Russia find a peaceful resolution of this conflict. Recently, on February the 3rd, the US State Department was asked for America's position on the ongoing Chinese aggression against India. You know how the State Department began its reply? It began its reply by saying that it encourages both China and India to find a peaceful resolution of the ongoing tensions. So they take a very neutral stance. Biden hasn't uttered a word on Chinese aggression against India. The least we could have done was to urge Beijing to pull back forces from the Himalayan border. That deployment of almost 2 lakh Chinese troops on the Indian border is in violation of bilateral agreements. In other words, it's a violation of international law. And yet, I have not heard a single Western leader even urge Beijing to pull back those forces. But they want India to tank its relationship with Moscow and become totally dependent on the US for weapons and other goods by condemning Russian aggression. India is taking a very sensible stance. That measured stance is very much in keeping with India's strategic interests. If India were to condemn Russia, it'll achieve nothing. It will only constrict its strategic leeway, and it will hitch its wagon to Washington and become strategically dependent on the whims of the United States. That's not in India's interest. India would like to be close friends with America, but as an equal.
Andrew Wood, ex-British ambassador to Russia, how do you respond?
I would point out, first of all, this is not a question of NATO. It's got nothing to do with NATO. That is a Russian excuse, because Russia wishes to conquer and absorb Ukraine. It is a direct attack on a democracy with no reason whatsoever behind it. There was a mention made before about negotiation with Russia. All the European countries and the United States have negotiated with Russia. Russia has simply stuck on its demands that we shrink NATO and so on. It is an inevitable outcome that Russia has done what it's always wanted to do, which is to conquer a neighboring country. Everybody in India will remember that nations arise by freeing themselves, as India did. And I'm sorry it wasn't rather neater in regard to Pakistan, but European countries are all the product of a history. Ukraine is also the product of a history. It's a project of struggling for its freedom. Russia does not want to give it that, or at least Putin does not want to give it that. There are many protests in Russia now about the way that Russia has attacked Ukraine. The Russian propaganda says that Ukraine has been trying to attack Russia, and there's a military threat to Russia. That is obvious nonsense. It's much smaller. It has no interest in attacking Russia anyway, and it would have to go a hell of a long way to get any close to anything. That is. It also says that Ukraine needs denazification. There are no Nazis in Ukraine. It says that Russia was going to be greeted with open arms and great applause from the Ukrainian population. Nothing of the sort. This is an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation. And I believe it is in everybody's interest to recognize it as such. If there is bound to be disagreement...
Mr. Wood, if you'd allow me, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I want to get back to the moot point here, which is India and India's role. And you said that India must step up to the plate. Well, India is the world's largest democracy. If Ukraine is a democracy, so is India. It's the world's largest democracy. China is a communist dictatorship, and it impinges on India's territorial integrity repeatedly. We don't see, and not that we want, but we don't see either Britain or the US making unequivocal statements condemning Beijing on this account. It's just a simple question.
Well, I don't know if that is the case or not. I've never had the pleasure of serving in India, though I would have liked to do that very much.
Well, that's the fact, unfortunately, and it doesn't. It only exposes the doublespeak. We've also got a terrorist problem.
I don't agree that's doublespeak at all. It's not speaking when you would like it to speak. It's doublespeak for you to accept that Russia is entitled to invade Ukraine, but China is not entitled, which of course it is not entitled to invade India. That's obvious too. I had believed that we'd at least taken some...
Well, let me just jog you back to the 2000s when an illegal war, an invasion was planned by the United States and the United Kingdom in conjunction in Iraq on faulty evidence of WMDs, and I'm talking about Saddam Hussein. I have no brief for Mr. Hussein. Glad that he's in his grave, but the fact is it was an illegal war. So let's just keep this business of doublespeak, etc., in perspective. History teaches us. Sorry?
You said doublespeak. I didn't.
No, I'm just saying that there is an element of doublespeak here, but nonetheless, let me get the Russian point of view, and I want Maruf Raza to also come into this. Tatiana Kukareva, Russian journalist, how would you respond to Michael Wood and, of course, what Mr. Brahmacheleni and Major General GD Bakshi have said?
Well, it's a very clear, rhetoric coming from Mr. Wood, and it's the rhetoric that's unfortunately gotten us into this mess to begin with. As rightly noticed, Ukraine has been bolstered by both Britain and the US for all these 8 years. Ever since we saw Victoria Nuland on Euromaidan giving out cookies to people trying to overthrow a democratically elected president, which they did, essentially. And now we have the UK Prime Minister actually literally calling for Ukraine to retaliate, which is preposterous because, we've seen shellings of the two republics. We saw them for 8 years. And all this time, when the Western nations were supposed to guarantee the fulfillment of the Minsk II Accords, they did not. They did no such thing. They flew tons of money, tons of military equipment. I mean, the US actually, the last US shipment of, lethal aid to Ukraine, we call it lethal aid, but it's essentially it's missiles, and it's everything they use to launch those missiles with. 91 ton of lethal aid flown into Ukraine, delivered to Ukraine in January. Is that what we call, and then all of those countries, they literally sit back and just call for Ukraine to, let's respond, let's have more violence. The one thing that Russia has said from the beginning, from the get-go, we're not looking for war, we're destroying military targets because enough is enough. Enough killing people in Donbass. That has to stop. 8 years of constant violence, of violence that is ethnically motivated. Violence against Russian-speaking population, the two republics, the two regions of Ukraine that were predominantly populated by ethnic Russian people that decided to secede from a country that made them feel like second-rate citizens.
Okay, let me get in. Look,
that's very amusing.
Okay, look, I don't want to get into a war of words here, but let me bring in Maruf Raza. Maruf Raza, one second. Maruf Raza, where do you see this debate going with regards to India's position?
You asking me?
Rahul, there is India's position, there is also the Western position, and there is the Russian position. Some of that has been enunciated on this debate already. But let me explain a couple of things. I completely agree with Mr. Brahmacheleni and General Bakshi that we have not received any serious support from the Western world in our stand-up against China. And all this talk about Quad and everything that the Indian romantics who believe that hanging on to America's coattails will solve our security problems are completely wrong. They don't understand, as the Ukraine operations have shown, that America can lead you up the garden path, but then abandon you when the bells start ringing. And this is what has happened with Ukraine. And I'm quoting a very eminent American political scientist. He's not a lightweight, John J. Mearsheimer. He is recently in a talk which I witnessed on YouTube, has said very clearly that the problem of Ukraine is the creation of the United States. Why? Because the United States, Mr. Biden had many compulsions. The humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan, the reason that he wanted to show that he is still in the play in geopolitics. And of course, he is back to focus, back to Europe. America is back. That kind of line, as far as Europe and NATO goes, got him to bolster the morale of the Ukrainian president, who is anyway, in some ways, at least the Russian would argue, a plant out there, just like his predecessors, the Americans argued, were a plant by Russia. Now, Ms. Tatiana made a very important point. The point is that you only hear largely Western media and Western narratives, but you don't hear the kind of arguments that are coming out from Russia. Historically, countries have always produced a list of reasons why they go into conflict to justify it's a just war. Wasn't it an embarrassment for America that Mr. Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, as Secretary of State, gave a presentation at the United Nations to explain to the world that Iraq had WMDs? I mean, you're lying blatantly to the world and you're Secretary of State of America. And then you say Putin is pulling fast ones. Fine, Mr. Putin might be pulling some fast ones, but you have to answer, why is it that you got him to respond this way? And I'll tell you 3 or 4 things. One is, Russia's aim was to consolidate its land links to Crimea. 2 is the resources that Ukraine brings on the table. Forget for a moment the NATO aspect. Ukraine is the largest exporter of grain in Europe. It can feed 600 million people every year, which is twice the size of Western Europe. It has the largest magnesium ores. It has the largest ores of uranium. It has iron ores. These are amongst the top ones in the world. Titanium. So these resources are being eyed by Russia, just as they were being eyed by Europe. Now, what is it that India wants, and why should India be asked to bell the cat? Ukrainian ambassador says India should take a position. As you rightly brought out, Rahul, who took a position for India in all these years when we're crying ourselves hoarse about Pakistan being a sponsorer of terrorism? America has a blind spot for Pakistan even after they pull the rug under them in Afghanistan. We buy weapons from Afghanistan, from the United States, in the range of $21 billion. We are one of the biggest markets. What do we get in return? There's still peanuts that are provided to us. What did Pakistan get for lying to America? $33 billion worth of free weapon systems. What do we get from Russia? We pay for it. Nobody does us any favors.
No one does us any favors, and there are no free lunches in diplomacy.